Can everyone see that screen?
Yep.
Yep, awesome.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul. I live in a small town called Kyneton in central Victoria where it gets really, really cold in winter and really, really hot in summer. Welcome to my talk. I hope you enjoy it. Um, I think the most important thing I could start with is just a little background about why I'm even here. I've been a tinkering Ruby and Rails developer for years. I generally love solving problems and making things more efficient. And for whatever reason, probably by design, because it's Rails, I've found that I use Ruby to do that a lot more than other technologies. Um, One of the things, like I suppose just a little bit about myself, one of the things I'm most proud about is automating my garden, which you can see here. I mentioned before that I live in Kyneton and the temperature here is pretty variable. So in my garden, I use Raspberry Pi running Ruby to connect to different weather APIs, solenoids, and like a variety of other things that we have to save water and grow more vegetables. It does things like, water's less when it's cooler or it's rained or is predicted to rain, or more when it's hotter or not predicted to rain. Believe it or not, the hardest part about this project wasn't the Ruby code, but it was combining mains pressure water with high voltage electricity. Definitely exciting. The other thing I've used Ruby quite a bit to do is measure, I suppose it's called behind the meter solar or behind the meter energy usage, which is actually a little bit more complicated than you think if you've got solar panels on the grid, because essentially you need to understand it's not trivial to understand how much you've used in your household, because you can easily find out how much you've sent out. You can easily find out how much you've pulled in, but figuring out what you've used inside the house is actually the intersection of the two. But by squishing together, I suppose, some data I've scraped using Selenium from various distributor web portals and my solar inverter, I've managed to make myself and a few of my family friends like a daily report which lets them know how much power they've used in their household each day, which is really quite useful if you're trying to maximize like how much you use in your house and minimize your use of things like coal generated electricity. So that's kind of why that's important to me. I'm also the head of marketing at Up, where, believe it or not, I've hopefully somewhat disproved the long-standing theory that people who work in marketing can't also contribute to a code base, even if in a really, 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 really trivial way. We make some pretty rad ads there to try and convince people to give us a go. And the reason for that is that we're super aware that money is going to do one of two things for most people. It's either going to empower them or cause them stress. And so we build Up to basically try and take people from a place where they are feeling like anxiety or worried about money to one where they feel empowered and in control of their money. And they can use it to kind of live the life they choose as opposed to the opposite, because one of those two things is going to happen for most people. And this kind of brings me to my own talk, which is about ways that I've automated my own finances. And I promise this does actually also involve Ruby. But before I get started, I think it's important to mention that I'm not a financial advisor. You should definitely not take this as any form of financial advice. This is just me talking about things that I've learned and systems I've developed over the years to make my relationship with money a little bit less stressful and more empowering, largely using technology. So the first thing I try and do is avoid lifestyle creep, which is a phenomenon whereby like your spending expands to fill the amount that you earn, regardless of what you earn. And I found the best way to counter this is to work out what it costs you to live a life that you're comfortable with, and then stick to this by paying yourself what you've worked out you're comfortable living on and saving or investing the rest. For me, that's meant working out what I was spending, which I did in a spreadsheet, and then I could start to work out whether I could cut it out completely or not. And if I couldn't cut it out completely, then I'd investigate whether I could reduce it at all. And then for everything left over, I would put that into either a recurring spend bucket or a non-recurring bucket. Recurring things are things like registration or health insurance, gas or electricity. They're pretty bumpy, but they're relatively predictable. So ultimately, then there's also not that much choice about them after a certain point. Some of them are pretty essential life expenses. And I consciously try and lower this amount over time by, say, like changing internet providers or insurance policies, but it's not something that I think about every day. They're often the sorts of things you can pay through direct debit or using credit card to smooth out the bumps and troughs. And then there's the non-recurring things, and they're things that I can't pay for on credit card automatically, like cash for karate lessons for the kids, or more transactional things like groceries or clothes. And they're areas where like the cost can vary a lot based off the small choices that you make over the course of time. So how many bottles of wine did you buy? Did I buy the expensive cheese, or did I buy that Patagonia jacket that I've been wanting to get? Like all those sorts of things will affect whether or not you blow that sort of amount of money. The second thing I've learned that, like real pools, large pools of money are quite dangerous. And having access to that large pools of cash can make it pretty easy to whittle away your money without even noticing it. And then you break rule number one by accident. So a large pool of money is something that's different for everyone. For some people, it could be a monthly salary or even a fortnightly one. And for some of the others, it could even just be having access to a little bit more than you normally do. So for me, I found that even paying myself fortnightly had unintended consequences, which I'll cover in a second. And the third thing I've learned is that automation helps me make good choices or better choices. And for me, that's meant paying myself the minimum amount possible more often rather than paying myself a larger amount less frequently. And at the moment, I've landed on paying myself weekly on a Thursday at 6 a.m. And you might wonder why Thursday. Well, it was because I found that when I paid myself on a Monday, I'd spend all my money on groceries and have no money for beer. But when I paid myself on a Friday, I would spend all my money on beer and didn't have any money for groceries, unless I kind of broke rule number one. So Thursday seems to be just right. And this is how it all kind of ties together. So once a month, money comes into what I call a slush fund when I'm paid. And the cadence here isn't important. It could be fortnightly, it could be weekly, and it really doesn't matter because all the money is accounted for over the course of a month. So by the time I'm paid next, the balance of that slush fund should be basically the same as it was the last time I got paid. So if it goes up or down, something's not right. There's either I'm spending too much or I haven't accounted for enough. So it should stay pretty constant. It's a good check metric, I suppose. Then during the month, money's taken from that slush fund to basically clear out any recurring subscriptions, put money into the kids' bank accounts for pocket money and pay the mortgage or invest in shares. And anything after that is also put, I suppose, anything that is beyond what you had to spend goes into those other buckets. So it's all accounted for. And then once a week on Thursday morning at 6 a.m., the total amount of all the weekly non-recurring expenses gets shipped over to Up. And it usually arrives in about a 30-minute window. So what I've got then is at 8 o'clock, I have auto transfers set up to automatically move the amounts that I've specified from that spreadsheet in a weekly basis into the various savings buckets that I have in Up. This is my real accounts. And one of the unique things about Up is that I can set up savers for the different types of spending that I've mapped out and give each a goal amount that I can use to see how full it is. So basically at any point in the week here, I can see how much I've got left for food and groceries. So yeah, as you can see, I've got on the left all of the different auto transfers that I've got set up, and it's a pretty small thing, but being able to set this to trigger at exactly 8 o'clock is actually more important than you'd think, because what I'm trying to do here is remove my ability to overspend by taking care of this while I'm still getting ready for the day. So, money's come in and then it's got shuffled into all of its different accounts while I'm basically having coffee, and I couldn't have really spent that money. So it's really just protecting myself from myself. And it sounds pretty exacting, or maybe some people would say a little bit OCD, but this whole system is definitely not about being a miser. I live really well. So some of the savers like food and groceries fill up every week, whereas others like dog food take 2 months to fill up. And that's because for dog food, $23.08 gets pushed into a saver every week. And then in 2 months, I have enough money to buy 2 bags of dog food, which is enough for the dog to eat for 2 months, as well as all the treats they get. Petrol is a similar sort of thing. So it's kind of one tank a month. So it's $27.69 per week. And by working this way, by the time we fill up again, the pool is also full. And in Up, we have some different banking verbs. We call them covering and forwarding is one of them. Or covering and forwarding are two of them. So forwarding basically works like forwarding an email. So you forward money you've received from some other bank into one of your savers, whereas covering is where you cover from a specific purchase instead. In my case, I always buy things using the float that I have and then cover it from the saver that it was supposed to come from. So for example, my savers budgets will drop during the week. And so food and groceries will keep going down until the next Thursday at 8 o'clock when it gets filled up again. And there's nothing stopping me from moving money between these accounts, but the main thing is I don't top it up from the slush fund. So that would be, breaking rule number one and lifestyle creeping. And all that kind of leads me to the Ruby part of this talk. And some of you may have seen that we launched the Up API this week. And if not, definitely worth checking out the developer.up.com.au. For all intents and purposes, so I should say that Up is also built using Rails and a whole lot of JavaScript. This is also why the Up part is kind of relevant. But for all intents and purposes, the Up API is probably the first banking API for normal humans in Australia. sure, there are other banking APIs that do exist, but they're usually for businesses to integrate with like certain finance packages, and joining them is usually takes a fair bit of paperwork and hassle. You've also probably heard of like open banking and the consumer data right, and we're really big fans of this. But for developers like you and I, the issue is that at least initially, open banking is going to help finance companies share information with each other, not necessarily give you programmatic information to your account and transaction data. So the ARP app actually does that. So you can basically go to the documentation site, and in minutes after you've joined, you can just hit the Get Personal Access Token button, and away you go. And then from there, you can retrieve information about your accounts, you can retrieve information about your transactions, and you can even use webhooks to be told when things have changed. So I suppose, back to the examples I gave before, and then how I've used the API to scratch an itch that I had. Essentially, people put a whole lot of effort into making all of that awesome documentation and to build webhooks and all these fancy things. I got to the first sample example and stopped there. And for me, that really meant figuring out what I could do with my accounts. And as I mentioned before, my up balance is actually pretty useless to understand how much I've got left for that period of time. Because it's just my float, most of the time it's $300. And that's what it always is. So what I've done with the API is really simple. But firstly, I grab my account data from the API, and then there's a few pieces of information that I care about from the response that I get back. And I've kind of split them into short-term balances, groceries balances, transactional balances, overall savers balances. And then I've gone through and basically identified the accounts by the IDs that they've got. And then basically I iterate through the accounts to retrieve the information I'm after and send it into the arrays that I'd set up earlier. And then I can start to do something really interesting with it for me, which is that because in my particular situation, that $300 is a pretty useless number, it's always the same. What I now really want to know is the combined balance of my groceries and eating out savers minus any amount below $300 that I haven't yet covered. And then I need to have that in my brain to tell me, well, how are you going this week? Like, have you spent too much money, or how much do you have left? So basically, I combine all of that information into a little report, and then I send it to myself using a push notification using a tool called Pushover, which I found really awesome. And this is what I get out of it. So, every 3 hours now, I get a little notification telling me how much I have left for my groceries and eating out budget for the week, and then what my overall savers balances is, and then all my overall balances. And that's kind of cool, but it's also a bit average. It's not a particularly pretty notification. I think like every normal person out there, I have a home temperature influx database and Grafana dashboard where I track the temperature of places around my house. I track external temperature because my gardening exploits kind of mean that becomes important, and internal temperatures because I'm trying to work out how to improve the thermal efficiency of my house. Totally normal. So I thought, what the hell, let's add balances to that dashboard as well. So you can see that in the top line here. So now I have a dashboard with like a little widget to show me how much money I've got left in food and groceries. And I can also, I suppose one of the best things about that is that now that I've got it in Grafana, I can do things like set myself on alerts to send me information about, when my bathroom gets too hot or when my bank balance gets too cold, I can get it to tell me about it, which is really cool. So yeah, I had a whole lot of fun with this, and like I said, I'm probably, there's a lot I'd like to do next once I learn how to do it. So for me, I don't know how to use webhooks at the moment. So I'd love to use webhooks to trigger the code I've written to run every time I've made a transaction and then tell me what that was, as opposed to on a time-based basis. I'd also love, there's a thing called balance notifications, which basically tells you how much you have left in your account when you buy something. And the reason we built that was kind of to help people, because nobody has cash anymore. You don't have that sense of how many notes are in your wallet. So the point of the balance notification was to replace that. So you always have this tacit awareness of how much money you've got. So I'd love to replace what we're currently doing up with the more useful information that I can do through the API. And I'd also love to give myself some encouragement, you're going well, or you spent too much, slow down. Little things like that would be possible if I could do this with webhooks. Yeah, so it's been a pretty crazy week, and there's already people we only shipped this, I think, 2 days ago, and there's already so many people making awesome stuff with it. The top left here is the guy who basically made it so that when he gets a transaction into his account, it gets put into Google Sheets in real time. Bottom left is a Google tab. Sort of when you open a new tab in Google, it tells you what all your balances are. So it's, again, that's the tacit kind of awareness of of your money, which helps you save it. And the one on the right is a really cool Internet of Things little, I think it's an Arduino feather pumping onto a little LCD display, not LCD, what are they called? Little display. Really, really cool. And I can't wait to see what people come up with when they get further and further into it. So hopefully, this talk has inspired you to give the API a go or improve your finances. One of those two things, I'll take either. If you haven't tried up yet, use the link in the right and you'll get a little cash to try it out. But yeah, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, there's a few other Forestia developers on the talk who might be able to answer the technical side of things, but I can answer as many as I can. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Virtual. Does anybody have any questions for Paul?
Hi, I have a question. This might be a dumb question, so just tell me to get lost if it is, but GraphQL versus REST API, was there thinking about which way to go in that sense?
Justin has opinions.
Go on, Jazzy.
Yeah, so I can probably field that one. There was a lot of thought given to that. We kind of felt that REST was probably a better starting point. There's no reason we couldn't do GraphQL in the future, but I think experience from previous gigs of mine have told me that GraphQL is really amazing technology, but it's still incredibly new, and it kind of is very hard for people to just open curl and see something useful. The barrier to entry is a lot higher, and that was kind of something we were quite aware of and wanted to make sure this was something that was really quite accessible and easy to explain to people so that they could get in and have a better connection with their finances, I suppose. Definitely not something that won't change in the future. Maybe we'll do a GraphQL API, but yeah, that was kind of the thoughts.
In case you picked up, there was a lot of internal debate about that specific thing.
That was a hot topic, that one.
Sounds like no more questions at present. There might end up being some discussion later, perhaps, after our second talk. Does anyone need a moment, just like get another cup of tea or anything?
I've got a question actually.
Right.
Do you have to manually like triage all your transactions into those different categories?
As in the covering part?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So at the moment, yes. Basically, you just I think you can even do it on the push notification you get when you buy something pretty soon. But at the moment, you basically just press the transaction and you cover it from a different location. There is a thing that we're looking to build called automatic covers, which will do that automatically. So you basically specify which transactions you want to come out of which buckets.
What about PayPal transactions? That's something that drives me mad with Combank, that like, oh, it's PayPal transaction XYZ, blah, 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 but you don't know what it's for.
We do a fair bit of work to try and disambiguate that and make it so you can see what you actually bought. But it's I think it's not a perfect science, but we do our best to have it would be worth trying it out and seeing what you find. Yeah.
I've got a question. I used to work at NAB, and I talked with some of the open banking guys down there. Said there was something like a couple dozen different security checkpoints and attestations that they had to do in order to even get any data out to open banking. And I was wondering how much behind the scenes, like security stuff, you guys had to do to get the API to something where people could consume it.
Mike?
Many. Yeah, like, I mean, that's about, to be honest, 95% of my job. But yeah, lots of code reviews, pen tests, anything that you can imagine. It's probably been through it. There's a heck of a lot of auditing behind it. We're pretty happy with how it all came together in the end. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. It's not an easy environment to write code in, but it's good fun getting it done.
I assume the API is like read only, like you can read all of your data, but is there any, like, you can like make a transaction through the API?
Not
Yeah,
yet.
not yet. We're going to do that at some point, and we know how we're going to do it. You can obviously like create webhooks to get notified when transactions occur. But yeah, at the moment, at this stage, it's just read only.
Well, was there much like compliance and regulatory hassle with getting an API out? I'm getting nods.
No, not regulatory. Like, so it's not regulated as to how, like, banks don't have to provide APIs at the moment, which is why they don't. The big four now do, but even then, they don't have to give you as a customer your data. The only thing that they're required to do is to be able to allow you as a customer to consent to another party to get access to your data. So yeah, from what our read of it is we're the first bank in Australia to actually sort of give customers access, like effectively a personal access token and access to their data. So there isn't a regulatory, I guess, assessment for that. But yeah, happy to I don't know, give another talk on those aspects if it's interesting to people.